country. Ever since independence, we have never seen this kind of full-fledged assault, a 360-degree assault on everything that we value, every democratic value, every human right, and indeed every value of civilization. If we see the assault on freedom of expression and freedom of speech, we find that's one of the most important values in any democracy, in any civilized society, that people should be able to freely express themselves and say what they feel, what is right, what is wrong. But today what we are seeing is a multi-pronged attack on freedom of expression in this country. Those who criticize the government, whether they are journalists or activists or even ordinary people, they are often charged with sedition by various police organizations and authorities, even though the Supreme Court had ruled as far back in 1962 that the offense of sedition can only be committed if there is incitement to violence or incitement to public disorder. Yet, the offense of sedition is being used against people who merely criticize the government or say things which the government does not like. Apart from that, there are lynch mobs on the street which have been let loose by the ruling government in connivance with the police, gangs and goons like those who entered Jawaharlal Nehru University about a year ago and beat up students and teachers there in the full gaze of the police. So, lynch mobs also assault people who speak against the government. And then there are lynch mobs on the social media and in the mainstream media who defame people who speak against the government as Naxals, urban Naxals, Tukde gang, agents of Pakistan, Khalistanis, and so on and so forth. So we have created an environment in this country where if you speak against the government, you run the risk of being charged under the laws of sedition, sometimes even under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, sometimes under the National Security Act. You run the risk of being beaten up on the streets by these goons and lynch mobs who have been let loose. And you run the risk, of course, of being labeled as anti-national, Tukde gang, urban Naxals, Khalistanis, agents of Pakistan and China, etc., by the media which is controlled by this government and by their own social media trolls. The right to protest, which is again a very basic right in any democracy, that is also being systematically crushed. We saw some of the finest protests against the unconstitutional Citizenship Amendment Act in this country. It's a clearly unconstitutional discriminatory legislation which has been challenged in the Supreme Court. There are as many as 200 petitions challenging that act which are pending in the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, for the last 1 year, the Supreme Court has not found the time to even hear those petitions. While they hear frivolous petitions filed by people like Arnab Goswami or some others. Those protests, the anti-CAA protests, showed a remarkable democratic spirit by the protesters. we found that during those protests, they were teaching the constitution, constitutional values, human rights, etc., to young people, even to children. Uh, they were totally peaceful protests. There was not a hint or not even a whiff of any violence or incitement to violence. And yet, this government and its police, which has become an instrumentality of repression, that has used the protest to say that the protests themselves were an incitement to the riots. The riots were fanned and organized by BJP and its gangs and goons, etc., as was clear from the videos of Kapil Mishra and that Anurag Thakur and many others who were openly inciting people ki goli maro salon ko and so on. Yet, instead of arresting those people for the riots or for the violence that took place in Delhi, who are seen on video doing all these things, the police uh, has been saying that those who helped to organize the anti-CAA protests, that they were the conspirators who conspired to engineer these riots. I mean, the whole thing has been turned on its head. The same thing they are trying to do with the farmers' protests, which are currently taking place. Again, uh, three farm laws, which are whose object is to hand over the entire sector of agriculture and farming to large corporates like Ambani and Adani. Make the field open for contract farming by these large corporations, large scale contract farming. Allow these corporations to hoard food grains, allow them to enter into direct negotiations with farmers, form cartels, etc., destroy uh, the APMCs, the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committees, which are called mandis, where farmers are supposed to be given minimum support price for their crops, destroy those and allow corporates to buy farmers' produce at very low prices, below cost prices, hoard it and then sell it for a huge profit. This is the object of these three farm laws which have been brought. They were brought without consultation with either the farmers or with any state government. And they were passed in the Raj Sabha without even a physical vote, when it was clear that the government did not have a majority in the Raj Sabha and the bills would not have been passed had there been physical voting. The rules require that even if one MP asks for a physical vote, there has to be physical voting and not just a voice vote. But here, in that pandemonium and shouting and screaming, etc., the presiding officer of the Raj Sabha declared that they have been passed, even though it was clear that the government did not have a majority there. So now, when the farmers come out and protest against these laws, again, there is an attempt by the government to somehow discredit them, defame them. They first called them Khalistanis, then they called them separatists and terrorists, then they called them Tukde Tukde gang, then they called them agents of the Congress party, then they called them agents of these middlemen who are controlling these mandis, etc. Now they are calling them agents of Pakistan and China. And this is all the government and its controlled media, as well as its social media trolls, etc., who are doing this kind of name calling. Of course, first the farmers were prevented from marching to Delhi. Trenches which were 10 feet deep were dug on the main highways in order to prevent them from coming to Delhi. They were tear gassed, they were water cannoned. I mean, it's a gross violation of the right to protest, which is a fundamental right under our constitution. So they were first prevented. Now when they have camped at the borders, and there are huge convoys of 25 kilometers, 40 kilometers in length of just farmers camping on the highway where they were stopped. Yet the government is not willing to withdraw these farm bills, which are firstly passed without consultation, secondly passed illegally in the Raj Sabha, and thirdly the parliament is certainly not even competent to pass some of these laws because agriculture is a state subject. So the right to protest is under serious assault by this government. Then we find that all kinds of activists and human rights defenders are being targeted. Some of our finest human rights activists and human rights defenders like Sudha Bharadwaj, Gautam Navlakha, Anand Teltumble, Father Stan Swami, they have been arrested under the UAPA by the National Investigating Agency, which is clearly functioning as a political tool of this government, on absurd charges of trying to conspiring to assassinate the Prime Minister. These are people who weren't even there at the Bhima Koregaon protests. They were, of course, protests which were absolutely peaceful and fine protests, which happen every year. And in the organization were people like Justice Sawant, Justice Kolse Patil, etc. And yet, people who were not even there in the protests have been arrested in the Bhima Koregaon case first by the Pune police, which was under the BJP government. And thereafter, as soon as the government changed, the case was immediately transferred to the NIA so that the investigating agency remains under the control of the BJP and the central government. And now they have been arresting some of our finest human rights activists right and left. So we are seeing that all kinds of investigating agencies, NIA is of course at the forefront, but other than that, the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, the Income Tax Department, all of them are being used now for political purposes by this government to harass, intimidate human rights activists or dissenters who are speaking out against the government. The mainstream media has been largely brought under the control of the government by various methods such as inducements, that is giving them advertisements. Those sections of the media who are willing to play the role of propagandists of the government are given huge government advertisements so that they get a lot of funds. There are sometimes even some of the anchors and the main people in these media organizations are sent packets of money by the BJP and their corporate cohorts, etc. Those who are not willing to bend because of such inducements, they are threatened by using these investigating agencies like the Enforcement Directorate, CBI, NIA, Income Tax, etc. So organizations or media organizations like NDTV who have still held out are still being threatened and still being harassed by using these investigating agencies. Even one good thing that has happened is that with the growth of the internet, there are a number of good media organizations on the internet which have come up, which are called alternate media organizations such as The Wire, Scroll, Quint, news laundry, and there are a number of individual journalists who have sprung up and who are quite good and quite popular, such as Dhruv Rathi, young people like Dhruv Rathi, Akash Banerjee, and many others. There are many such people who have come up, who put out their programs and their talk shows on the YouTube or on other parts of the social media. Even they are being targeted. Even they are being targeted by this government, but fortunately they have not been able to cow down most of these fine alternate media outlets which have come up. Apart from that, every institution which are considered to be regulatory institutions under our constitution or under our laws is being targeted. The judiciary is the most important one because it is the job of the judiciary to enforce fundamental rights of citizens, to ensure that the executive and the legislature remain within the bounds of their powers, and to force the executive to perform its legal and constitutional duty. So the judiciary is supposed to be a very important independent institution, the most important independent institution in this country. But today we are seeing that the Supreme Court's independence has collapsed, and the Supreme Court has either abdicated its responsibility to protect fundamental rights of citizens, or they have just fallen in line with the government and are willing to kowtow and do whatever the government, or say whatever the government wants them to say. This we are seeing in a very large number of cases which are either not heard, important cases such as the cases challenging the Citizenship Amendment Act are not being heard. The cases challenging the abolition of Article 370 in Kashmir are not being heard. Habeas corpus petitions of many people are not being heard. And on the other hand, wherever petitions are even heard, such as the Ayodhya matter, we find that decisions which are absolutely extraordinary are being given, or the Judge Loya case, or the uh, Rafael defense scam, etc., or the Birla Sahara case, we find extraordinary decisions are being given by the Supreme Court, and each one of them in favor of the government. This is what those 4 senior judges said in that unprecedented press conference in January 2018, where 4 senior judges of the Supreme Court came out and said that the then Chief Justice, who is considered to be the master of roster, means that he decides which case is to be heard by which bench. They accused the then Chief Justice of misusing his powers as master of roster and fixing politically important cases before chosen benches in order to achieve an outcome favorable to the government, as a result of which they said that democracy had been put in danger. That problem is not only continuing 3 years down the line, that problem has got accentuated, has got increased during this time. Fortunately, some of the high courts are still performing their role, their constitutionally assigned role to protect democratic rights, to protect fundamental rights, etc. So there is still some hope in the high courts, and we still see some light at the end of the tunnel because of the role that the high courts are playing. Apart from the judiciary, we find that the Human Rights Commission has also collapsed. I mean, far from doing the work that it is supposed to do, when it is seeing so much violation of human rights across the country, it is seeking to legitimize human rights violations, such as what they said in the police assault on the Jamia students, when CCTV cameras were showing, everything was showing that the police went into Jamia, brutally beat up the students, even went inside the libraries to beat up the students. The National Human Rights Commission still blamed the students for that violence, which was a almost one-sided violence by the police on the students. The Election Commission's independence has also been very seriously compromised in recent years by appointment of pliable people to the Election Commission. When one election commissioner, so what we are finding is that the dates for elections are being fixed in accordance with the wishes of the government. Uh, the government seems to know what dates the elections will take place even before the Election Commission announces it. They are being fixed at the convenience of the Prime Minister so that the Prime Minister can announce whatever he wants to announce before the Model Code of Conduct kicks in. The violations of the Model Code of Conduct by the Prime Minister or by Mr. Amit Shah or senior leaders of the BJP, they are ignored by the Election Commission. And when one election commissioner gave a dissenting report, he was shunted off to the Asian Development Bank and he was forced to resign. First, the income tax was set upon him and thereafter he was forced to resign. So the Election Commission's independence, it was an independent institution for the last more than 30 years or 35 years, but its independence has been seriously compromised in recent times. The same thing has happened with the Comptroller and Auditor General, which is supposed to audit the finances of the government and government institutions. That was also an independent institution which used to independently and robustly audit government finances. But today we are finding the specter where the CAG gives its reports on the lines suggested by the government. The CAG does not audit things which it is supposed to audit if the government does not want them to audit that. The CAG omits things from their reports if the government wants them to omit it. I mean, the starkest example of this is in the Rafale defense deal, where the government told the Supreme Court, even before the audit report of the Rafale deal was signed by the CAG, they said that the CAG has given its report. They said that it has been made sent to the Parliament also, and they said that the pricing details have been omitted. Now, by this time, the CAG had not given any report, and never in the history of the CAG had the pricing details ever been omitted from any defense deal audit. But for the first time, so 2 months after this thing was told to the Supreme Court in a sealed envelope by the government, the CAG indeed gave its report, and we found that it was entirely in line with what the government knew in advance, and they had omitted pricing details, which was unprecedented. So that just shows or indicates how the independence of the Comptroller and Auditor General has also been compromised. The Lokpal, which was an important institution, I mean, there was this huge movement for the Lokpal which took place, the anti-corruption movement, and even which forced the government to, the then government to bring a law for the Lokpal, which happened before this government came in, but soon after that, this Modi government or the BJP government came in, and ever since they came in, they refused to appoint a Lokpal. Ultimately, we had to repeatedly approach the Supreme Court, and eventually they were forced to appoint a Lokpal, but they have appointed people who are just sitting in five-star hotels and they have not bothered to investigate a single deal. Not even one investigation by the Lokpal in the more than 1 year since they have been in office. And before that, as I said, for 6 years, this government, or 5 years, this government stalled even the appointment of a Lokpal. All the police agencies and the investigating agencies, as I have mentioned, have been brought under the control of the government, and they are working despite the Supreme Court's judgments on the CBI and on police reforms, requiring various things to be done to make the CBI and the police independent of the government. But we are finding that the police as well as the CBI are being still used as political instrumentalities of this government. Apart from this, there is a serious assault on the independence and even the academic excellence of the universities. The universities are supposed to be places where critical thinking is supposed to be practiced and encouraged. People are supposed to ask, to question everything so that new thinking, new research can take place, etc. But instead of that, what we are seeing is that the government is putting their RSS people in charge of universities as vice chancellors, who are preventing any kind of open and free discussion and seminars, etc., within these universities, and are telling people to just become order following machines or automatons. They are these vice chancellors, for example, the JNU vice chancellor says that we will install tanks in JNU campus, tanks and aircrafts, fighter aircrafts, in order to instill a sense of patriotism among the people. So, scientific temper. I mean, one of the directive principles of our constitution is that the government should do everything to encourage scientific temper. But we are seeing exactly the opposite happen. I mean, all kinds of scientific nonsense is being propagated by the prime minister, by ministers, etc. This prime minister went on television to tell children that there is no such thing as climate change, and that people are just feeling hotter because they are growing old. He went on to inaugurate some Reliance hospital in Mumbai, where he said that there was great advancement in plastic surgery in ancient India because Lord Ganesha's trunk was stitched by plastic surgery. He went on to say that Kern was a product of in vitro fertilization. Every kind of scientific, there are ministers who say that for coronavirus we should eat some papad, which will protect us from coronavirus. There are other ministers who say that you chant go corona go and coronavirus will go away. So, I mean, scientific temper is being shredded by this government. And not just scientific temper, every kind of civilized value, the value of truth. I mean, the government is creating this BJP and the RSS, and this government is creating what is known as a post-truth society, where all kinds of falsehoods, fake news, falsehoods are spread through WhatsApp, and by setting up, I mean, just 2 days ago, the EU, one EU organization, one NGO based in the European Union, they have come out with a very detailed report how India and this government's favorite, Prime Minister's favorite agency, ANI, and some Srivastav group, etc., set up a very large number of fake accounts in the names of dead people, in the names of other people, etc., to spread all kinds of fake news on a very, very large scale. The IIT Cell of the BJP, their only job is to spread fake news and issue threats of violence, of rape, etc., against innocent people. And this IIT Cell of the BJP, which mouths the foulest kind of abuse in the filthiest language, threats of violence, rape, sends out all kinds of fake news. This IT cell is managed and controlled by the Prime Minister himself, as Swati Chaturvedi has shown in her book, I Am a Troll. He calls the members of the IT cell to his Prime Minister's residence to have tea with them, takes selfie, allows them to take selfies and photographs with him so that they can put up these photographs on the social media page and say that I am proud to be followed by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister follows them on the social media. So truth is being shredded, all civilized values, I mean, violence is being encouraged, abuse is being encouraged, and the government and their cohorts are openly saying that we are now creating a Hindu Rashtra. They are openly saying that Muslims will have to be second-class citizens in this country. Of course, they are doing everything to reach there by means of using police agencies to harass, intimidate, beat up, sometimes kill innocent Muslims and Muslim activists in particular. But they are also using the CAA and the NRC, etc., to somehow strip Muslims of their citizenship. So, all in all, what we are witnessing is a full-fledged 360-degree assault on not just democracy, not just fundamental rights, but every value of decency and civilization that you can imagine. I mean, this government is not merely fascist, it has all the elements, this party and its leaders, that is the BJP, the RSS, Modi, Shah, have all the elements of absolutely the worst kind of values that one can imagine. And therefore, because they have so much power in this country, our civilization, our democracy, our human rights and its defenders are under very serious threat. But there is a silver lining. And the silver lining is that despite this full-fledged 360-degree assault on everything that we value, we are seeing that a large number of activists, especially young activists, young people on the alternate media, young Muslims, young Sikhs, young Christians, and young Hindus, all from people from all community are still standing up and continuing to do and say the right things. One example of that was in this beautiful anti-CAA movement, which has been sought to be defamed and discredited by this government. It was a wonderful movement where we saw all kinds of people coming together to protest against the unconstitutional and discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act. The same thing we are seeing in the farmers' movement. It's absolutely, you should go and see the spirit of these farmers. There is food being served to lakhs of people. People from all over have come out to do service to these farmers who are camping there to protest against these bills or laws which have been designed to hand over the farming sector to the crony corporates of the government. So these are some of the silver linings, and of course the fact that this alternate media has come up, and there are these fine alternate media organizations on the internet who are doing a fantastic job of real journalism. When the mainstream media has collapsed, at least the alternative media is standing up. And there are these young people on YouTube, etc., who are also doing a fantastic job. So therefore, that's the silver lining. And therefore, everything is not lost yet. And what we need to do today is firstly, we need to inculcate the spirit of our young activists who are not afraid of going to jail, who are saying, all right, I will continue to, despite this repression, I will continue to do the right thing. Let the government put us in jail. How many people will they put in jail? So we need to firstly lose the fear of going to jail. We need to learn from these farmers, imbibe the spirit of these farmers who say that we have come here and we are prepared for a long struggle. We are here even for 6 months. If it takes 6 months, if we need to sit here and camp here for 6 months, we will do it and make the government withdraw these farm laws. We need to bust all this fake news. There are good institutions like Pratik Sinha's alt news. There is Boom Live. There are some good organizations which detect fake news quickly and inform us that this is fake news which is being spread by the social media cell of the BJP, etc. We need to, this is fake news which is hateful, etc., are serious offenses. We need to take action against them. We need to file complaints against these people and pursue those complaints. So we need a team of young lawyers and activists who will file complaints against the people who spread fake news, especially hateful fake news, and who will pursue those complaints. And most of all, we need to spread love and brotherhood. You see, India is a very, very diverse country, and that's the strength of India, that we have so many languages, we have so many regions, we have so many different kinds of people, different religions, etc. That kind of diversity is our strength, and we need to ensure that that strength is used in a positive. And as we are seeing in this farmers movement, that all kinds of, or even in the anti-CA movement, that Sikhs and other persons from other communities came to help. That movement was to a very large extent anchored by the Muslim community, who were to bear the brunt of this CA, Citizenship Amendment Act. But it had the support of all people, especially the Sikh community. That's one thing which we need to learn from the Sikh community. Just as we need to learn the value of education and medical care from the Christian community, who have set up some of the finest educational and medical institutions in this country, but we need to learn the spirit of service and the spirit of standing up against injustice, the spirit of standing up for the weak and the oppressed and the poor from the Sikh community. So we need to build on all these values, and all of us need to stand up to this assault on our rights and on fascism and on democracy, and we need to reclaim our republic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for delivering very inspirational, in fact, with facts and incidents. So, friends, we could see that Prashant Bhushan has identified a whole lot of issues which we need to actually take a look at, right from anti-CIA movement and how these are being handled by government, and how investigation agencies are actually targeting people controlled by government, and all constitutional mechanisms, institutions are being actually controlled by the government. It is, in a way, it is a undeclared emergency that we are seeing. You can look at this, and at the same time, we need not actually keep quiet. We need not be afraid and scared, but we need to actually take a stand and face this kind of situation. And he has mentioned a whole lot of issues, including that Bhima Koregaon. It's not just 16 human rights defenders they are inside. It's many, many in the entire India. They are inside and they are charged with seditions. It touched upon a whole lot of issues and how the government is responding and how we should actually respond to this kind of situation, especially the constitutionally established bodies like human rights commissions, national human rights commissions, how they are actually positioning themselves are being controlled by the government. All this we need to take into control. And yes, invited especially the youth to come up and is quite optimistic. So that optimism is something that we need to keep in mind and take it forward. The youth need not have pride, and youth should take up, and especially the journalists. The social media role is very important. The love affection is something that we need to, because our country is diversified country. So in this, we need to really have a responsibility to detect this kind of fake news, hate speeches and all this, and deal with that. And uh, with this, now I just would like to uh, invite a couple of you to ask questions, and you please mention your questions in the chat box, so such questions will be raised. So now, sir, uh, yeah, Katyayani Chamraj has actually raised a question. Prashant Bhushan ji, thank you for a fine lecture. I would like you to also comment on the dilution of labor rights happening throughout the 4 labor codes. This is one. Related.
Yes, there is also an assault on labor. You see, this is in line with the thinking of this government, where they feel that the whole economy, all our resources are for the service of their crony capitalists like Ambani, Adani, etc. And therefore, they see labor rights as an impediment to the profits or to the functioning of these corporates. So they have been trying to dilute minimum wages, maximum hours of work. They, during this pandemic, they used the pandemic to issue ordinances in several BJP-run states to dilute these various laws. Some of those ordinances were forced to be withdrawn. Some of them are still there. But in general, what we are seeing is that this government is not just wanting to dilute all labor protection laws, including the Industrial Disputes Act, the Minimum Wages Act, the Contract Labor Act, etc., but they are also wanting to dilute all environmental protection laws and rules, so that even environmental regulation does not pose any impediment in the functioning of these crony capitalists of this government.
Next question is from Lenin Anthony. Our democracy is in danger. How can we safeguard our democratic values? What can be done with regard to arrest of human rights activists, including Father Stan?
I've already said that we need to continuously raise our voice against the arrests of our human rights activists and defenders. We need to continuously approach the courts also. And ultimately, you see, the courts do respond to public opinion. And we are seeing that some of the high courts at least are responding. And I feel that if there is enough pressure of public opinion brought to bear on the Supreme Court also, then sooner or later the Supreme Court will also start responding. So we need to have our act together, and our act is to continuously raise our voice against the weakening of democratic institutions and values, and against the assault on human rights defenders. And we need to use whatever is available with us to build public opinion, to spread the awareness, the use of alternate media, social media, etc., to spread the awareness of all this, protest wherever we can, and lose the fear of going to jail. That is very important. You see, if we remain fearful of the government taking action against us and putting us in jail, we will not be able to do anything. I can't hear you. You are muted.
Yeah, sorry. Sir, when the state fails to provide justice, is there any danger of sub-state actors trying to fill the void, as it is evident from the contemporary of Middle East and Africa? And how can we save the rule of law and our democracy?
No, it is true that if the state institutions and society cannot ensure justice, then naturally people will lose faith in the institutions and in civilized systems, and they will start resorting to extra legal, extra constitutional bodies and violence and so on. And that is one danger that we are seeing across the world. And that's also a danger in India, that eventually, you see, if you allow this kind of unjust system to prevail and to continue, then eventually people will start resorting to violence, take law into their own hands. That's a danger that is there, and we have to therefore ensure, make our institutions of law and justice function, and the rule of law to function properly.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from Josephine. Prashant ji, don't you think the dilution are the result of inappropriate steps of systems in formation of systems and government?
No, I think that our constitution is a fairly good constitution. Of course, it needs some strengthening. Some of the institutions need some strengthening in various places. For example, the government still selects the election commissioners or the controller and auditor general. We need to have broad-based independent committees to select all the people in our regulatory institutions. We need a proper judicial appointment commission. We need a judicial complaints commission. So we do need some strengthening. But on the whole, the constitution is a good instrument, and it has set up fairly good institutions. We need to, of course, build on those, but we need to ensure that they work, and they will work only if there is enough pressure of public opinion.
Thank you, sir. There are two questions, similar questions. One from Peter. Can we have faith in legal system today? Justice today is not reachable. What is the solution? That's one. And Vijayanand Sharma asked, do you think there must exist a time-bound judicial processing and pronouncements for all kinds of cases?
Yes, we need to strengthen the judicial system. It is true that the judicial system is largely dysfunctional, and there are various problems. and we need a whole slew of judicial reforms in this country. To begin with, we need to make the judicial system accessible to the common people. So the Gram Nyayalaya Act should be implemented, and these Gram Nyayalayas should be set up, which should function in a relatively informal manner so that people don't need lawyers to approach these Gram Nyayalayas. Secondly, we need to improve the system of selecting judges. So we need to have proper judicial appointments commissions, both for the lower judiciary and the higher judiciary, which are robust and function independently of the government and function with transparency and function with some system. That means they must lay down a criteria for selection and thereafter follow that criteria in a robust manner. And we need a judicial complaints commission for entertaining complaints against judges who commit misconduct. We need these kind of, and we need to strengthen the independence of judges by preventing post-retirement jobs to judges in the hands of the government. And also we need to do away with this master of roster, the Chief Justice alone deciding which case will be assigned to which bench, etc. Because in this system, if the Chief Justice comes under the government's control, then they are able to control the whole court. So therefore, we need to have a broad-based, at least 5 senior judges involved in the making of the roster, and thereafter, once they make the roster in terms of type of cases, they constitute benches for depending upon type of cases. Thereafter, each case of any particular type should be randomly assigned to any one of those benches which is assigned to hear those kind of cases. Today we have a totally arbitrary system where the Chief Justice can decide every individual case, to send every individual case to any individual bench of his choice. This system is being unfortunately used or abused in order to so once the government gets the Chief Justice under their control, they are using that to get all politically sensitive cases assigned to convenient benches of their choice and get them decided in the way they want them to be decided. So we need to do away with this. That's it.
Thank you, sir. A student.
Last question.
Yeah, okay. Last question. A student from Law College asking, dear sir, my question is that UAPI is used to curtail the freedom and rights guaranteed by Constitution. Why is there no judicial review over this act, and why is it not scrapped?
Yes, in my view, it should have been scrapped. In my view, it's an unconstitutional act. At least the provision for bail is unconstitutional. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court has upheld its validity and has recently given a judgment which is even worse, where they have said that even inadmissible evidence will be taken at face value at the time of granting of bail, and bail will not be granted unless the judge, the law says bail will not be granted unless the court records that there is no prima facie case. And in seeing whether there is a prima facie case or not, they say everything that the police says will be taken at face value. It's an absurd judgment which needs to be overruled. And even the validity of the act needs to be considered afresh. It's a totally draconian law, which effectively means that any person can be arrested and charged with anything, howsoever absurd, and he will not get bail. It's absurd. It's totally unconstitutional.
Yes. Thank you, sir. That's last one. Last one. This is from a lawyer. Madhaya is PUCL member also. His question is, there seems to be hypocritic stand on cow slaughter banning law. On one hand, it invites tender for supply of B recently in Karnataka. On the other hand, it bans. Judicial views on this, it is hypocritic style.
Yes, it is hypocritical, and it is designed only to somehow give the police the power to harass innocent Muslims in particular. Same way like the love jihad law, which they are bringing in UP and in other states, etc. The whole object is to harass innocent Muslims, and we are seeing that in UP already happening within a week of that law being promulgated in UP. There are so many cases of harassment of innocent Muslims that has taken place. So these laws are only designed to see the BJP and its governments want to kind of make Muslims into second class citizens who can be harassed and targeted by any police authority at will. These laws are only with that object.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for giving us very inspiring talk with facts and figures, also solutions and what kind of roles that the citizens, the common people will have, all that, and also responding to the questions raised. Thank you very much for all this. Now over to Father Francis. Uh,
Dear sir, dear sir, I am Father Francis from Indian Social Institute. It's my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks. You have took us the plethora of different activities of the government and how it is trying to stifle the democratic values and the independence of various institutions. You took us to the election commission, the controller and the auditor general, the Lokpal, the police agencies, and so many other institutions, independent institutions, how their independence is destroyed over and over again. And a result of this, the common people are feeling strangulated. But at the same time, sir, you also mentioned a silver lining, a glimmer of hope among the young, the farmers, the ordinary people of India. They are the hope that you said. I feel you have touched I think, the conscience of all those people who have participated in this and also in the YouTube. I feel that in so many different ways, sir, you are the conscience keeper of this nation, that you have the courage of conviction to speak whatever you feel it is right and just. I'm feeling that you're the conscience keeper not only of the millions of people and also the billions of people across the globe. Your dissent with regard to that 1 rupee fine that you paid had become so worldwide known, and we feel encouraged that we to be part of this dissent and to work for justice. And finally, you had mentioned, sir, that ultimately it is the love and the brotherhood that will prevail. You have called us to give that, to spread love and brotherhood among all the communities. There are so many other communities who, the Sikh community, the farmers, who show so much of love and brotherhood, the diversity that we experience in our country. Sir, we thank you wholeheartedly on behalf of all those who present here and those watching the YouTube. A big thank you. We thank you, sir, for making your time available for each one of us. We have the presence of Archbishop of Bangalore and so many other people. I would like to thank also the Archdiocese of Bangalore, the co-organizer, and PUCL, Rajendra sir was there, and also the CRI and the staff of ISI, and so many other people who are responsible for organizing this event. To each one of you, a big thank you. Please continue to take the points that are given by Senior Advocate Prashant Bhushan, and let us continue to strive towards making our nation reclaim. The last word Prashant Bhushan said was reclaim our land, reclaim our nation. I think that is the call to each one of us, to reclaim our republic. So thank you very much to each one of you. Thank you for the Jewish Savior and all the staff of ISI for making everything available, and especially thank for all those who participated in this webinar.